Ladies and gentlemen everywhere, It's a God Thing radio program is on the air.
My God is a mountain mover. My God's gonna make a way. Can't count all the times he's proven we can trust him just that big. Take a hopeless situation, watch him turn it all around. Nothing is impossible. I can't hold back. I gotta shout. My God, my God, my God is a mountain mover.
Yes, our God is a mountain mover, and you know what? He's still moving mountains every day. And the good news is he can move your mountains too. Hi there, this is Chuck Cooper, host of It's a God Thing radio program. Thank you for joining us today. We sure are glad you're here. You're about to listen to some awesome interviews with believers in Jesus Christ who will tell you how God has revealed and proved himself to them by moving mountains they were unable to move by themselves. They say that their stories can only be described as a God thing. Ready for a real blessing? Alrighty then, let's do this God thing. Are you battling an addiction that you can't seem to overcome? Are you an alcoholic, workaholic, foodaholic, drugaholic, or any number of other aholics? Well, stay tuned. We have two guests today who have battled addictions for years, and they both claim that their independence upon God has put them on the path to recovery. Perhaps, just perhaps, their stories will inspire you to turn your addictions over to God, who will lead you to a new life like he did for them. Our guest today is Dorothy Clark from Decatur, Georgia, who for years and years has valiantly fought what we would call an eating disorder, but which she describes as an addiction for food. Her story of pain and suffering and how she has been able to endure the extremely painful consequences of her addiction, with God's help, of course, will bless you greatly. Here, with her incredible story, is our cousin, Dorothy Clark.
Oh, thanks, Chuck. My story is about an eating disorder and how the Lord led me to the completion of that story. And I see the Lord's work all the way through. But it's really started back when I was just getting out of college and out of graduate school. I was in my early 20s, and I was a perfectly normal weight. But about 25 years later, I weighed almost 300 pounds, and I'm quite short, as Sue and Chuck can tell. Over the years, I have fought my weight with every tool I could think of. I went on diet after diet after diet, losing weight, gaining it back, regaining even more weight. I saw about 4 or 5 different Christian counselors, fine counselors, who tried to help me work through the eating disorder. And I went to healing services. I even checked myself into a hospital eating disorder treatment program. And I exercised like a fiend over those years. And
Well, Dorothy, let me interrupt here.
yeah.
You say eating disorder. What was that like? What is the eating disorder?
For me, it is compulsive overeating, binge eating disorder, and I think probably at the base of it, sugar addiction too. And so I could not stop myself from eating. I ate and ate and ate junk food, healthy food, anything I could get my hands on. When I was on a binge, I just could not stop eating. It's filling some emotional need, but for me, I never could figure out what it was. Right. And like I said, I think just plain old sugar addiction really became the trigger. I would start on something sweet, and it's like my cocaine.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I don't use cocaine, but it's like cocaine for me.
Right.
So yeah, I think it became an addiction.
Okay, so you got frustrated because you couldn't seem to find any help or anybody or anything that would help you get rid of this addiction.
That's correct.
And you called it an addiction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I went back and forth between calling it an addiction and feeling like I ought to have some control over my own behavior.
Sure.
And through all this time, I prayed and begged God for deliverance from this, because I felt shame. I felt like I was in terrible disobedience to God, because gluttony is a sin. It didn't matter. I could not conquer it. By the time I was about 50 years old, my body was really breaking down from the strain of carrying all that excess weight for so long. And where it manifested itself the most was in my lower back. The pain in my back became excruciating. And so I sought help for that. I saw doctors, I saw massage therapists, I saw physical therapists, I had injections in my back to stop the pain. I went to a pain clinic, nothing. And the chiropractor I was seeing at the end of my search decided he'd better x-ray my back. And he found that one of my vertebrae was out of alignment. Basically, that one vertebrae was trying to pass the others on the road.
Wow.
And it was pressing on nerves.
Sure.
And causing terrible pain. He told me I needed surgery, but I had to get the weight off.
Before you could have the surgery.
Yeah. He said he could do the surgery, but it would break down again because I was so overweight. So I went.
Did he give you a target weight so that you could have the surgery?
No, he really didn't.
No, he didn't. Okay.
I went home with every intention of doing what he had said.
Sure.
And we continued on with the injections and the physical therapy and everything. I went home determined to get the weight off. And to my great shame, a year later, I went back to him and I had gained 20 pounds.
My.
I could not do it.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't lose weight anymore. I had lost in the past, but I'd done it so many times I couldn't do it anymore.
Well, let me ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
All along, I think you indicated you've been praying hard
Mm-hmm.
and begging God. And all along, you were dependent on God to try to help you with this.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get frustrated that he wasn't listening to your prayers and he wasn't helping?
I don't think I did, Chuck. I saw it as my failure, not as God's failure. I tend to blame myself for most of what goes wrong.
Okay.
And I guess partially, I don't want to blame God. That makes me feel guilty.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Feel less guilty by eating than you do with disobeying
Yeah, or something,
God.
yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
So when I saw him, that after I had gained 20 pounds, that surgeon, who was a gift from God, had the worst bedside manner of any doctor I had ever seen in my life. He looked me square in the eye, and I will never forget his words. He said, "You need back surgery, and you need it bad, but you are too fat for the surgery. If you do not have weight loss surgery immediately and get this weight off, you will be so broken I will not be able to fix you."
Wow.
Well, that hit home. Maybe I needed somebody to talk straight to me.
Mm-hmm.
I went right home and Googled weight loss surgery. I'd never considered it in the past because I didn't feel like my stomach was my problem. My problem was in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And also the two kinds of weight loss surgery I knew about, the lap band and the bypass, they both kind of gave me the creeps.
Sure.
I was not keen on either one of them. But through all this, the Lord was working. When I Googled weight loss surgery, right up at the top of the Google page was a surgeon named Guillermo Alvarez. And he was beginning to perform a third type of weight loss surgery called a vertical sleeve gastrectomy, which basically means he removes about 80% of the stomach. That's
Wow.
all that's done. There's no foreign objects left in your body, no bypass, no nothing. You just come away with a sleeve-shaped stomach.
Wow.
That holds very little. It doesn't stretch back out again later on or anything like some of the other surgeries do. Well, that interested me. The clincher was, though, that Dr. Alvarez is in Mexico. The thought of surgery in Mexico was a little off-putting.
Right.
But I searched for weight loss surgeons in Atlanta that were doing the sleeve. There were only two at the time, and this was almost 10 years ago, and they had terrible reputations. Plus, they charged, and my insurance was not going to pay.
Yes.
It would cover no weight loss surgery. These two surgeons in Atlanta, which I didn't like the sound of them anyway, they were going to charge me about $30,000 to have the surgery.
Wow.
Yeah. If push had come to shove, I would have come up with the money somehow if I had to take out a loan. Well, all that drove me back to look at Dr. Alvarez again. He had a stellar reputation, not a black mark against his name anywhere. He had some training in the United States. He's only a mile over the border in Mexico from Eagle Pass, Texas. He has an office in Eagle Pass, a patient coordinator in Eagle Pass, and he charges a flat fee that covers everything. All the room, the board, the anesthesia, everything. At the time it was $10,000. Now it's even less than that. I figured $10,000 in the bank is doing me no good if I'm dead.
That's true.
So I decided to continue to look into it. I looked at what his patients said about him. His patients love him. He has a Facebook page. We all stay in touch, and you all can tell that I did go ahead and use him. Before I got off Google, I called his patient coordinator. Well, by the time I hung up the phone, I had a surgery date, only about a month and a half in the future, and I started clearing out my house of all the food he said I would never eat again. I did the pre-op diet, and I was good to go.
Mm-hmm.
My pastor got a young girl who spoke Spanish to go with me because we didn't know if the nurses would speak English, whatever. Anyway, the night before I left home to fly down there, I was sitting at the kitchen counter drinking my last dinner because, liquid diets were the thing for the last several weeks. And I just put my head in my hands and I prayed, "Dear Lord, do you really want me to take this perfect stomach that you gave me when you created me and have 80% of it chopped out?" And I heard back in my head so loud that my head snapped back, "If your eye offends you, pluck it out.
Oh my goodness.
If your hand offends you, cut it off."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay, Lord, I think I've got your answer," and off I went.
Did that seal the deal for you?
That sealed the deal.
Wow.
And I think the deal was sealed anyway, but that made me doubly sure I was doing the right thing.
Right.
And
Confirmation. Yeah, sure.
And so off I went. The surgery was a wonderful experience, not a single problem. The surgery was 9 years ago. There's no way to overeat with the sleeve because the stomach is so small.
Right.
So within the year, I had lost 115 pounds. I was back at the orthopedic surgeon's, and he did the surgery on me and saved me from a life bedridden or in a wheelchair, because I would have eventually lost use of my legs and I would have been in such pain. I would have had to have been institutionalized, I'm sure.
So you were having some serious chronic back pain.
Yes.
It was caused by your overeating and your overweight.
Yes.
And so the surgeon told you you needed to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then another doctor said you were too darn fat, so you needed to lose that weight or you're going to die.
Yeah.
So you began searching for some help and couldn't find it except with this one doctor that you Googled, and you found him in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So you made the decision after talking to the patient coordinator, okay, I'm going to go ahead with this. And then the day before you left to go, you still had some questions. Is this what you want me to do? You asked the Lord if this was to give you a confirmation, and he gave you one, speaking to you through your spirit into your head, and you went on and had the surgery.
Yes.
Great. And then you came back and had the back surgery.
Yes.
And did that help?
It did. I wish I could say that after that all was well, because after I had the back surgery, all was well.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to pay the price for the abuse that we put our bodies through. I couldn't undo, by losing 115 pounds, I could not undo 30 years of carrying around all that excess weight. My body was damaged.
In what way, Dorothy?
My knees are in terrible shape. My hips are in terrible shape. And the first back surgery, although I thought it was going to fix me,
right,
my body was so damaged at that point that I've had to have 4 spinal surgeries since then.
Wow.
And because of complications, I've got nerve damage in my hips and my legs. I still have a fair amount of pain. I'm on a lot of pain medication, and I'm partially disabled. I have a hard time walking.
Yes.
But God has worked a miracle through that too, or several miracles through that, through all this process, I have learned to trust him more and more. Mm-hmm. He has drawn me closer and closer to him. And even though I have a hard time walking and my legs don't work properly when I'm standing up, when I sit down, my legs work perfectly normally. And that brings me to another subject of I'm a church organist, and if any of you have ever watched somebody play the organ, we play with our feet as well as our hands. There's a whole keyboard under my feet. Because my legs work perfectly normally when I sit down, I'm still able to play the organ and support myself.
Well, that is a God thing.
It's a God thing. The whole thing is a gigantic God thing.
My goodness, Dorothy. Let me say, I'm very pleased as a distant cousin that you have a very thankful personality, a thankful heart. I know your commitment and submission to Christ, but you also are upbeat. I've never heard you say anything negative other than about the direction of this country, and that's another story for another time. So how have you been able to cope with all this that you say that you brought on yourself, mm-hmm. but how can you be so upbeat when you're having difficulty walking, you still have chronic pain, you're on pain medication for that? How can you stay so positive and upbeat?
It's not me. My mother used to tell me I always looked on the negative side of things. So it's not me. It's the Holy Spirit in me and the joy that he gives me. And it's also the realization that things could be way more terrible than they are. And I don't wish any of this had not happened, because the Lord has used this to draw me so much closer to him. And I'm so thankful that I can work, I can live on my own, I can take care of myself, I can drive. I could be bedridden.
Sure.
Had things gone in a different direction.
What advice would you have to somebody who's addicted like you were to food?
I would start out by saying, take it to the Lord and follow his leading. But so often this starts when we're very young, and we don't have the maturity to do that. Mm-hmm. See doctors, see counselors, Christian counselors. Try dieting. I think there were several points in my weight loss process before the surgery, when I did Weight Watchers or some other diets, when had things gone a little bit differently, I think I could have conquered the weight. But then something happened and sure. I was back on. Some people can conquer it through diet and counseling and prayer, and some people can't.
Was there a point in your life where you recognized and had to admit to yourself that you had a weight issue and you needed to do something about it?
When I was talking to this counselor about my depression, she began to look into things in my history, my family history,
right.
Why I was depressed. And at some point we got to the eating problem, and she began to put the name on it of compulsive overeating.
Okay.
And the more I researched, read articles, I realized, yeah, I'm a compulsive overeater. I kept trying to tell myself I wasn't, that I was just a sinner,
right,
giving in to temptation. But when I was in my right mind, I had to realize I had tried as hard as I could try.
Sure.
And yeah, it's an eating disorder. And I still have the eating disorder. Having a small stomach doesn't cure it, but it sure gives me a chance at controlling it.
Well, and it's working.
Yeah.
It has worked.
Yeah.
It has worked.
Yeah.
I interrupted you when I was asking you about the advice that you would give to people with this overeating disorder, this addiction to food, as you said, and to sugar particularly. Mm-hmm. And you indicated that they needed to, first of all, they need to admit they had a problem, or they can't ever resolve it. Even with God's help, they can't resolve it.
Yeah.
They've got to be part of the equation. But then to seek counseling and to seek people that can help them. But you had God on your side. There are a lot of people that don't have God on their side.
That's true.
They may be listening to this program right now. What would your advice to them be?
My physical advice to them would be, if they feel like they're addicted to sugar, is you have to cut every grain of sugar out of your diet. Just forget it ever existed, because it is like cocaine. It is an addictive substance, and you can't have a little of it. it calls your name and calls you back for more and more. But on the spiritual side, talk to some Christian friends. We have the internet. You can seek out sites that give advice. I would hope that Christian friends might guide you to commit your life to Christ. You'll never regret it. If Jesus is real, then we're wise to acknowledge that.
So Dorothy, because you were a believer,
Mm-hmm.
and you had Christ to trust,
Mm-hmm.
that he eventually helped you when you realized that you had the problem and you had to live up to what was expected of you to overcome this this addiction, and that you see now, and I see in hearing your story, that God orchestrated a whole lot of stuff for you to bring you to this point today.
Yes.
And that's how he works. So
Yes.
I have, is there anything else you'd like to say? Because I have one final question.
So go ahead with your question.
Okay. Would you say that all that God has done for you and orchestrated for you was a God thing?
Oh, most definitely. My whole life has been a God thing, from
Amen.
beginning to end.
Amen. Thank you so much for sharing this. You're going to help people you'll never know.
It's been a pleasure, Chuck.
Wow, what a great story. It's our hope that you have been inspired, encouraged, awed, and intrigued by what you heard today. We earnestly pray that hearing these stories as a regular listener to our program will be a source of hope and encouragement to you, that these stories will strengthen your faith in God and will lead you to a closer walk with Jesus. Whether you're a believer in Jesus Christ or a not yet believer, we pray that you will reflect on the God thing incidents in your own life and conclude that it was God at work and that he was knocking on your door. Now, let's get back to today's program. I'm so grateful that our guest today has agreed to share his incredible God thing story with us. You see, Kent Cooper is my son who had a life-threatening event just a few months ago. And frankly, except for the grace of God, he probably wouldn't be here today. Kent, we're glad you are here.
Amen.
And so tell us what happened.
God grabbed me by the ear and pulled me to the side and said, I need to talk to you. And he did it in a way using my health that has never happened to me before. I'm 57 years old. I haven't had any health problems ever since I had my tonsils out. And I earned health problems because of my living, my lifestyle, my diet, my lack of exercise at times, and smoking. And I went to lunch one day, I think it was February 17th, with my guys at work, and everything's fine, everything's normal. Had a great lunch. We're walking back, and I was out of breath. And we're walking on a flat parking lot, and I'm unbelievably out of breath, exhausted. I couldn't catch my breath, and then I felt a sudden incredible pressure on my chest, like an elephant sitting on my chest. And we were coming back over here to resume a meeting that we had been having all day. And we got back up here to the office, and I said, hang on, boys, I need a second to catch my breath, and went off into one of the offices and tried to catch my breath, and I couldn't. And one of the guys, one of my brothers who I worked with, was up in from out of town. And after about 5 minutes of this, he said, if you could see yourself the way I see you right now, you would rush yourself to the hospital. It's time. Long story short, long story long, we went to the hospital, and I had what is known as an aortic dissection. Somehow I had split my aorta all the way from the top of my heart all the way down into my abdomen. I didn't know how I did it, why it happened.
Have you had any symptoms of this? Or
None.
no heart issues? Or no
None.
breathing issues? Or
Never. Just, but I have, fought an ongoing, lifelong struggle with tobacco addiction. But the test that I went through subsequent to all that in the hospital, I was in the coronary care unit here at the hospital for 14 days. And all my arteries are clear. I didn't have the plaque buildup that they told me should be expected with a guy my age who had been eating the way I'd been eating and smoking and all that. So, and they couldn't really tell me what caused it. But the bottom line was, God slapped me upside the head with a 2x4 and got my attention, because that causes you to think about things that, as one of your other guests said in one of your other shows, I was calm about all of it because I'm not afraid of dying. I know where I'm going. I know I'm saved. But of course, I don't want to leave because of my children, my family, including you, by the way.
Okay.
Right, so, but I'm ready if he wants to call me home. But it causes you to think, your mortality, and that was a first for me, because I always kind of invincible,
Right.
I'm gonna
Aren't we all?
kick the world's butt,
Yeah.
just get back up and keep after it. But I got out, made some decisions on altering my lifestyle. I'm still struggling with one of those. And then 58 days later, I woke up and something was wrong with my eye. I couldn't quite open my right eye at home, and I just kind of sloughed it off, came to work, and then I started dropping things with my right hand. And I looked in the mirror, and my right eye was droopy. I didn't know what was going on, and I was afraid to write. I was taking notes. I was studying something at the time very intensely, and I was taking notes. And I was afraid to pick up the pen and write because I was afraid of what I was going to see, that I wouldn't be able to write.
Right.
And I finally did that, and it looked like, a first grader. And that was a stroke. One of the guys I work with, again, I was at work, he took me to the emergency room. So I had a mild stroke less than 2 months after this aortic dissection. Now every morning I get up and I take a handful of pills just to do what the doctors told me to do. Not to get through the day, but not to stay alive, I won't say that, but just to control some of the issues I have in my body, right? Like anybody, or a lot of people my age do that. So for me, it's caused me to realize that I'm not as young as I was, that I am aging, and that I do have to make changes, that I'm not indestructible, and that if I want to live and have the robust, full age that God might have in store for me, then I need to pay attention to my temple.
Well, let me ask you something. During this whole procedure and the 14 days in the hospital, what were you thinking? I know that you're a believer, and obviously you felt that God, you knew that God was in control, but you had no fear?
Well, of course, leaving this earth, my number one concern was, what did I tell my kids? I wasn't going to tell them, because I didn't want to scare them until I knew something, My only fear was how it would affect them, and that's what I thought about, was what to tell them, how to keep them calm, because to them, I was, in the early years, like we all are, as parents to our children, we're their heroes, we are indestructible in their eyes, and I just didn't want to worry them, so that was really my only fear, because again, I'm saved, and in January 1978, he reached down and he saved me. I've been a prodigal son more times than I can count.
I can attest to that, but you're home now.
Yeah, but he has always accepted me back.
He always will.
Yes.
He promises
He's
that.
always-
He'll never leave you.
And always forgiven me. I've never been able, he's never let me deny who I am.
Right.
My identity. Oftentimes, as much as I've tried, and where I was for physically, geographically, where I was for several years, in a place that was not predominantly Christian. But to answer your question, no, I wasn't really afraid, other than my kids, when not being around for them, and
Right.
that was the number one concern.
Well, how are you feeling now? I know you were terribly, terribly weak when you got out of the hospital finally.
I feel I'm back to myself. Myself mean I've got the energy that I need. I've got the motivation, but I got to tell you, and then we talk about the hand of God, how He guides the flight of the sparrow. All the hairs on our head are numbered. I believe that very, very much, and I've seen that because the timing of this, what He did, when He did it, how He did it, and given with my new career that I'm launching, the first question I have about my career is why? Why am I in this? Why did this door open at this particular time? Why me? What do I have to do in this particular professional track that I'm on? And the answer is pretty clear, is to help people. I think it was, well, of course, it's better to give than receive. And I have really, really, really experienced that when you're able to help somebody and take your eyes off your own problems and help somebody else with their problems. To answer your question, it's kind of turned, it's focused my career, where it's not just a career, it's ministry. How am I going to help and be used and be open to being used?
Just follow his lead, son.
Yeah.
And
Because,
he's been leading you.
Oh,
As
absolutely.
a matter of fact, I can look, Sue and I can look back over your life, and we can see how God orchestrated things, events in your life, and so we question why a lot.
Yeah.
But we recognize that now that He was guiding and directing you and preparing you for what you're doing now.
For this moment, at this crossroads in space, time, and history, this exact moment, that happened when I was walking across the street to bring me to here, and that led to here, and that led to this, and I'm just along for the ride on all this. And only when you're able to stop and take a breath and look back and say, oh, okay, I think I get it. I think I understand. So at least that's my takeaway. That's how I interpret.
Sure. Absolutely.
Just being dependent on it is very, very humbling, of course. Because when I was in that, how active I am or how busy I am, and you saw me in that coronary care unit.
Right.
And
it wasn't a pretty sight, son.
And it was, I had a range of emotion of about 12 inches. I had probably, 20, 25 wires and needles coming out of me, and I was hooked up to everything, and that drove me crazy because that's not me. It's like a wild horse being, tied up. And so I'm back. To answer your question, I'm back out. I'm doing well. He's blessed me.
Well, son, Sue and I both are very proud of you, trials that you've endured, and they have strengthened you. They've strengthened your spirit. They've strengthened your character. They've strengthened your walk with Christ. And that's the most important thing. So I'm going to ask you one final question, and you know what it is. Do you believe that God orchestrating all this your entire life and allowing this to happen to you to get your attention by tugging you on the ear and sending you to the ER? Do you believe all that's a God thing, son?
Without question it was. The number one takeaway from me, though, was when all this happened, how immediately I was surrounded by love in my family, my friends, and just to be able to see that, how people showed up to see me in that state, and I was okay with them seeing in my state, and it was a lot better than the alternative of being all. I was never alone, of course, he was with me, but to have, just to be surrounded by that kind of love, and the prayers, that was the God thing. I'll say that. The prayers of people at your church down there, and the prayers of people I'll never meet, they were answered. They were answered, and that's why I'm breathing and sitting here today.
Well, thanks for sharing, son.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
We're proud of you.
Wow, what a great half hour this has been. Tune in next time for more great God Thing stories, and tell all your friends to tune in too. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you or someone you know has a verifiable story which needs to be told, please email a brief summary to us at mystory@itsagodthingradio.com. That's my story, all one word, at itsagodthingradio.com. See you next time.